The Gulf has always felt like a place of mystery and power to me, shaped by storms, tides, and time. People debate its name and argue over its fate. But as a little boy, it was just wild, unpredictable, and alive, with more life than I could ever imagine. I remember walking out on a pier with my dad, looking out over the Gulf and asking him if there were great white sharks out there. He looked at me and said, "Maybe, son." That moment came rushing back February 24th, 2024, when a female great white fitted with a satellite tag showed up 100 yards from the beach at South Padre Island, Texas, on the Mexico border. Tagged by the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy and Captain Chip Michaelov off the coast of South Carolina just a few months previous, Beth made headlines around the world and shattered expectations of great white sharks in the Atlantic basin. But it didn't surprise me. Oh, I was extremely excited, but this shark's appearance put an exclamation point on a story I had been gathering for most of my career as a wildlife journalist. It all began back in 2005, when great whites and the Gulf seemed incompatible. Then, Captain Ryan Warhola, a fishing charter captain, called me from a satellite phone off the coast of Sabine Pass on the Texas-Louisiana border.
We were 68 nautical miles out of Sabine, and it was a rig that I frequented quite often, so I knew the rig well, and it was a manned rig. And when we pulled up to the rig, all the rig workers were leaning on the railing, looking down, pointing. A couple of them, you could see them talking amongst themselves. And so we pulled up to the rig to tie off to it. And as we tied off, we backed off the rig. And one of them, after we got the motors, everything at idle where we could hear above the sounds of the rig, one of the guys yells down and goes, "Hey man, there's a big shark down there." And I'm thinking, sure, a big tiger, this is big hammerhead, maybe stuff we usually see. And we were fishing for about 20 minutes. We started catching some snapper, started chumming a little bit, trying to get some cobia or some kingfish to come up. And when I first saw what they had seen, what they were talking about and looking at, it came under the boat fairly deep, but I could see a giant shadow go under the boat. And I was like, oof, that's big, whatever it is. And it goes out and it kind of goes away from the rig. And then in the direction that it went away, I could see a fin coming towards the boat, and it was right up our chum slick, coming right to the boat. And as it passed the boat, it kind of slightly rolled to its side. I could see it, and my mind's going, "Oh, okay, that's not a tiger for sure. That's not a hammerhead. That's maybe a mako." But in my mind, I'm going, "That's a great white shark." And I've seen, growing up as a kid, I loved all the Shark Week, all the nature documentaries. Sharks were a big thing for me because I love the ocean, and I'm registering in my mind, that's a great white shark, no doubt about it. But also in the back of my mind, growing up in Southeast Texas, there was no talk of great white sharks in the Gulf of Mexico. You would think of New England or California. And I immediately picked up the phone. I called Chester and I said, "This is what I'm looking at. Triangle teeth, not typical mako." And you immediately told me great white, which assured me, okay, I am looking at a great white. And I got to watch that shark for about an hour. And it would come by the boat. It would make passes. I mean, we pulled the chum bag out of the water because I was scared it was going to try to eat the chum bag. And it was big enough that I was scared it was going to maybe sink the boat. Who knows? It was a giant shark. Biggest shark I've ever seen. Till this day, the only thing I've seen bigger is a whale shark.
Ryan's account led me to writing a story that year in Tide magazine, a piece that explored not only his sighting, but also historical reports from published sources that pointed to something deeper beneath the Gulf surface. The 1963 book, Shadows in the Sea, Sharks, Skates, and Rays, mentioned the presence of great whites in the Western Gulf as far back as the 1950s. I found the actual newspaper covering that first catch. The shark was referred to both as a great white and a man-eater, and through the years, more reports would surface from across the Gulf region.
We were out there long-lining yellow edge grouper, early March, 1984, I believe. there was a huge 15-foot groundswell rolling due west. We saw this big dorsal cruising west in those swells. We eased over to get a better look. We estimated it was 16 to 18 feet long and very fat. It was grown. We watched it for a few minutes, and then it went down. It was just cruising the surface in that big swell. It's the only one I've seen in 50 years of working and playing in the Gulf.
More recently, the Chandelier Islands, located between Venice, Louisiana, and Biloxi, Mississippi, have been the setting for compelling modern reports.
It was right after I got back in the boat after wade fishing. It swam right by about 10 feet off our starboard beam in 8 feet of water. It was shocking, to say the least.
I was wade fishing shortly after Hurricane Katrina. The storm had washed away mangroves, leaving little sand lumps you could stand on. I was on one in about 4 to 6 feet of water when I saw what I believed to be a great white the size of a Cadillac swim right in front of me. When I told the guys, no one believed me. They said it had to be a big tiger shark, but after seeing how tagged whites have swum near here, I know that's what I saw.
Anecdotal reports of great whites gained credibility when research group OSearch began satellite tagging them, with multiple great whites appearing in the Gulf, including one about 120 miles off Texas in 2021. Beth, however, did what no other tagged great white had done so far. So I set up a Zoom interview with Dr. Megan Winton, senior scientist at the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, to learn more about this shark's amazing travels.
I had an opportunity to hop on a trip with Chip Michaelove, who's a charter captain out of Hilton Head, South Carolina, who started catching white sharks there about a decade ago. And we partnered with him to tag sharks in the Southeast. And I had an opportunity in December of 2023 to go out on a trip with him. And that day, we caught a 14-foot, beautiful, huge white shark that his charter guest nicknamed Beth after his daughter, who had sadly passed away. She got every bit of shark spy technology that really exists. So we put 4 different tags on her that day. The one that was the most exciting from my perspective was a camera tag, and it clamps to her dorsal fin and essentially allows us to ride on her back and see everything she did for the next 10 hours. And that was huge to me as a shark scientist, because one of those tags has never been put out in the waters of the Southeast, which we know are an important overwintering area for white sharks, but we don't know what it is they're doing there. So it was really our first glimpse into the life of a white shark in the Southeast. She also got a satellite tag that was mounted to her dorsal fin. And so every time she comes up to the surface and her fin breaks the surface of the water, that satellite tag transmits her location in real time to overhead satellites. And we were able to follow along on this amazing journey that she made, where she really made white shark history. So based on that tag, we were able to watch her travel south from the waters of South Carolina, along the coast of Florida, along the Florida Keys, which is where I got the marine biology bug in part as a kid. She swam around into the Gulf of Mexico, right past New Orleans, then pinged in right off of South Padre Island in Texas. And people went nuts. Everybody was so excited, could not believe that this huge white shark was right off the beach in Texas. And then she kept going, and she swam down into the waters off of Mexico. And in doing so, she made white shark history. A white shark has never been tracked that far west in the Gulf of Mexico. And then we got to watch her come back, swim around Florida, head back north. She was headed towards Cape Cod, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to go out on a research trip, and I'm going to see Beth again, because she was breathtaking, one of the most amazing sharks I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And she was headed towards Cape Cod, and then she kind of made a little dogleg and went up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and stayed there all summer. The last time we heard from her was in October from that tag, and she was still in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So it was amazing, but she really became a shark science ambassador along the way, and a great ambassador for the species, because she showed up in so many places that people had no idea white sharks occurred, which was really cool.
Before we could begin to understand what was unfolding in the Gulf, we knew we had to go where the knowledge ran deepest and where the sharks were most visible. Dr. Winton invited us to Cape Cod to visit the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy's Shark Center and learn more about this area that is so important in the Gulf Great White story. Cape Cod has become one of the most active great white shark hotspots in the Atlantic. Every summer, these apex predators return, and with them come researchers, beachgoers, and global curiosity. Our goal was to experience the environment for ourselves and speak with the world's leading experts on Atlantic great white sharks, and it began by talking with Dr. Greg Skomall. Dr. Skomall is Senior Fisheries Biologist with the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries and one of the world's most respected shark scientists.
Beth exemplifies the magnitude of migratory behavior that these animals can exhibit. Beth went down south past the Florida Keys into the Gulf of Mexico, and we know a lot of white sharks will go into the Gulf of Mexico and typically stay on the eastern side of the Gulf. Beth broke that rule and kept moving to the west, past Louisiana, past Texas, and down and even crossed the Mexican border, which is really very important to know. And these border crossings are really significant as far as I'm concerned, because, when a species of fish crosses U.S. borders and enters, either international waters, which white sharks do, or the territorial waters of other countries, you now have to talk about, sharing data and coming up with sustainable management plans and conservation policies, working with other countries. Because the U.S. could protect a species, but if the country, whose waters are being penetrated by these species of fish, including white sharks, are not, then, our efforts may be meaningless. And so it's critically important now when we think about white sharks, as we do with other species of sharks, in terms of, multilateral, working with other countries, international conservation plans.
Technological advancements have enabled researchers to track white sharks with a level of precision and sophistication that early scientists could only envision.
When we started white shark tagging, we knew very, very little about the three-dimensional movements of this species over multiple time scales. So whether we're talking from about year to year or second to second, we knew very little about that. We had a couple of studies, that's it. We knew their general distribution, and our early tagging work, where we were really linked to satellite tags, we saw that what we previously thought about the movements of these animals was not necessarily what was happening. We were using historical biased data sets, and what these tags generate is unbiased data. So we saw this offshore movement that had never been described before in the species, where these animals are going out to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and diving down to depths in excess of like 3,000 feet, which we didn't even know they did. We thought it was largely a shallow water species on the eastern seaboard.
After our conversation with Dr. Skomall, our journey took another turn. The Atlantic White Shark Conservancy invited us out on the water, just off the coast of Cape Cod. On a calm, clear day, after a week of rough seas, we had the rare opportunity to witness their drone program in action, a high-tech effort to observe great white shark behavior from above.
What we're doing this summer is we're using a drone to collect aerial footage, and we're running two different types of trials. One is just observational, so we're just simply following sharks around for the entire drone battery, which lasts about 30 minutes in good weather conditions. Just flying, seeing what it does in its natural environment. Those are our control or observational trials. We're also running experimental trials, and so that's where we're randomizing the speed of approach and the direction of approach of our research vessel. So we're using our spotter pilot, and we're angling our boat so we're actually coming close to a shark, and it depends on whether, what speed that is based on our randomized trials, but we're trying to see if there's particular speeds or, sides of the shark that cause a reaction or a response. And we've ran 11 trials so far, and from the experimental ones that we've run, we've seen little reaction, which is kind of not surprising. That was really our hypothesis, but we have a lot more to do this summer, and we'll see how the rest of the project unfolds. But the drone is a fantastic tool to be able to study this, and we'll be able to look at how that shark responds before, during, and after those experimental runs, because we're making sure that we're collecting video footage before the boat approach, during that, it's a very fleeting moment of during the boat approach, and then how it reacts afterwards for as long as the drone battery lasts. So we're able to see, does the shark change its course? Does it go offshore? Does it come back in? We want to know how the sharks off of the Cape Cod are reacting to boats.
Before heading back to the Gulf Coast, we took a detour to see the iconic filming locations of Jaws on Martha's Vineyard, the place where pop culture and shark science first collided. I'm here at the Jaws Bridge. This is a scene from the iconic movie where the shark goes under the bridge into the pond area where Sheriff Brody's kids are out there in their sailboat. And it's just one of those places that I never thought I'd get to be as a kid, so it's super cool. And Jaws has an incredibly important role to play in how the public see sharks. It's not always necessarily a negative either. I mean, a lot of people got into sharks because of Jaws. A lot of people are shark conservationists because of Jaws, and I'm one of them. So very interesting to be here and actually look at this and realize this is where that was filmed. To help me put all of this together, I reached out to some friends who have made tremendous marks in the conservation of ocean wildlife and who have a heart for sharks. Dr. Guy Harvey is one of the most iconic marine artists on the planet and has made huge contributions to sharks and other species through his Guy Harvey Ocean Foundation. Another shark is making a comeback and popping up in the Gulf of Mexico, one that was unexpected by a lot of people, and that is the great white shark. And I know you're not doing direct work with great whites right now, but can you talk about how important, because you've done a lot of artwork on great whites, how important that species is as an icon of the ocean to get eyeballs on the ocean?
They're certainly a majestic animal, and it's the one shark, of course, that is used to consuming things that look like us underwater in a suit. And so whenever we dive with white sharks, it's always in the cage. I'm not for that sort of extraordinary experience. I have kids. I want to stay alive. But we did, in 2003 and 2004, we actually did collaborate with PIER, the Flager Institute of Environmental Research in California, to tag white sharks at Guadalupe. And it triggered a whole, just a whole bunch of different organizations working on that species, but in different locations from South Africa to Australia. Had been going on for years. But you have to remember that they were overfished. Their numbers crashed. They were mostly caught in a recreational fishery and killed for trophies. Being, top predators, there aren't that many around, not like the animals below them in the food web. So their numbers were low, and all the places that have them, so that's the Atlantic and Pacific USA, Mexico, South Africa, Australia, all protected the white shark, and so they bounced back. That's 20 years ago. So their numbers have come back. Of course, they're extremely well studied. They're probably the most well-studied shark because of their perceived danger, their sort of the fact that they could eat humans easily, so to speak. We have a fascination for that. We don't associate the interaction with sharks with that many other species as much as we do with the white shark because of the sensationalistic part of it.
Pat Murray, a fellow native Texan, is president of the Coastal Conservation Association. His input on great white sharks comes from a place of understanding of sharks and people.
The great white is funny. It's got a Disney-like quality to it in that people can relate to it no matter where you are. You can be anywhere in the U.S., hundreds, thousands of miles away from the water, and you still know great whites, and you either have a respect or a fear or some sort of appreciation for where they fit in the oceans. They just conjure some level of respect no matter what. And I think that becomes an amazing ambassador for teaching about conservation and conservation of maybe even other species. Because if you start to care about great whites, it might lead you to caring about blue marlin, or it might get you to even caring about something that's far smaller and far more local, but something that you can affect. So I think in the end, the more exposure people have to these species, probably the better.
While great white sharks grab headlines and their numbers in the Gulf may be increasing, the large shark Gulf Coast residents are most likely to encounter is the bull shark. Highly adaptable and able to thrive in both salt and freshwater, bull sharks are a dominant force in the Gulf's ecosystem. To learn more, we met with Derek York of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. York and his team are running a long line tagging operation, a method that lets them safely catch, tag, and release these powerful sharks.
Yeah, so Parks and Wildlife, we've been doing an ongoing program through the CMAP program, and currently we're going out in the Gulf of Mexico here off Texas with all of our different teams along the coast doing bottom longlining, sampling for shark biodiversity, trying to really see the number of species we have here coming into the coastal waters and stuff. And it's basically like if you ever fished freshwater trot lines, that's basically exactly what we're using, except it's really big. So the long line is set up as a mile long trot line basically on the bottom with 100 hooks spaced over that length of line, and then we put a certain type of mackerel bait on there, and we soak it for an hour and pick it up, and you would not believe the amount of life we see in such a short time. Sharks, all different kinds of species, predominantly bull sharks and black tips, redfish, black drum, big stingrays, all kinds of cool stuff.
For years, great white sharks in the Gulf were considered rare, even unbelievable. Their stories buried in old reports and scattered eyewitness accounts. But today, with real-time tracking, drone footage, and viral social media moments, the tide is turning. A new generation is growing up along the Gulf Coast, one that's not only aware of great whites in their waters, but excited by them. These young ocean lovers are the first to truly encounter these stories, not as legends, but as living, unfolding science. We wanted to hear what they thought. What does it mean to know that an apex predator, once thought to be exclusive to far-off oceans, might be swimming just miles from their beaches?
I think seeing a great white in general would be crazy, but seeing a great white where they're not known to be would be amazing. It would just be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The main thing I think that I would like to change is maybe the image of them, because I know a lot of people, when they think of sharks, they just think of predator or killing or, big sharp teeth or whatever, but they're not like that. Like, of course they are, because they are wild animals, but they're just animals, they're the same as any other in the ocean, and it's just important to know that they are important to the ecosystem as everything else is.
If I saw a great white shark in the Gulf, I would definitely freak out first, but I feel like we should stay calm. If I could tell the world one thing about sharks, is that they're very misunderstood. They aren't as dangerous as people make them out to be. We're in their territory.
So your generation and your age are the first generation to have great white sharks returning to the Gulf. What do you think about that?
I think it's exciting.
Exciting? Why is it exciting?
Well, if I do have kids, they're gonna probably love all the great whites, and I think it's gonna be cool for me, maybe.
Would you like to see a great white in the Gulf?
Yes, I would.
What did you think about that you're in a beach or in the water and there's sharks out there?
I think it'd just maybe be a little cool to get one to attack me.
Love it. From wide-eyed wonder to the depths of discovery, curiosity starts young. While science can explain a lot, those who make real waves for sharks usually start with something deeper, a heart that cared long before the facts were clear.
So I'm from Northeast Florida. I was born and raised in Jacksonville. And both sets of my grandparents lived in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, which has the somewhat dubious distinction of being the shark bite capital of the world. So when I was a kid, we loved going to visit my grandparents and going to the beach. And I was always kind of nervous about sharks. They were always in the back of my mind. And one day I was swimming at the beach with my sisters. There was a guy fishing just up the beach from us, and he caught a shark. And it probably wasn't a very big shark. But to us, I was probably 8 or 9 at the time. We were just like, oh my gosh, we were just swimming with a shark. How did we not get eaten? And we ran running out of the water. But that really sparked a curiosity in me. Like, how did I not get eaten? And so my mom started buying me books about sharks. I started watching every shark documentary I could. And I realized that sharks were really cool fish. They were fascinating from a biological perspective. And at that point, a lot of shark populations were doing really poorly and were kind of tanking across the board. And I realized these fish had a really bad rap that they didn't deserve. And so at that point, I kind of announced to my parents, I'm going to grow up and be a shark scientist. And I think they thought it was going to be a phase of mine. And I just never grew out of that phase. And it's been really cool. Like, I mean, every day I wake up and I'm like, oh, what am I going to do today? Go to work and think about sharks. It's like a 5-year-old's dream. But it's also been really great working at the Conservancy because there's such a focus on outreach and education that I'm not just like a scientist nerding out and learning facts about sharks that aren't useful to people. We're doing research that is directly used by the towns and the beaches to inform shark-related public safety practices here, but also to inform conservation measures for the species, which are really important because that population, we know, declined by something like 80% in response to fishing pressure. And it could very well decline again if fishing pressure ramps up for the species or those protections are repealed, because this is a shark species that gets to be over 70 years old. They don't start having babies until they're in their 20s or 30s. And even when they do start having babies, they don't have that many babies at one time because they're born at 4 to 5 feet long. And even though female white sharks are really big, they can only hold so many 4 to 5 feet long babies, right? So it's a species that's still very vulnerable, even though it's protected. And so that's one aspect of my work that's really rewarding, is getting to work with the public, getting to work with our education team to help come up with messaging around the species and just answer people's questions about sharks, because people are fascinated with these creatures. I've been fascinated with them my whole life, and I'm still fascinated with them because there's still so many mysteries that have yet to be solved.
Well, the first person to really inspire me was Matt Hooper, a fictional character in the movie Jaws, right? And so, you know, I saw him and I said, gee, I like that job. I want that job. He's got the coolest job on earth, right? And then I went off to University of Rhode Island and I learned about researchers not far from there that were doing shark work, and primarily a guy named Jack Casey and his crew, including folks like Wes Pratt and Chuck Stillwell. They were doing actual shark research, and I volunteered at their lab. And through them, I got to meet some of the icons in the field. You know, not only was Jack Casey considered to probably be one of the foremost shark experts on the East Coast of the U.S., but he interacted with folks like Eugenie Clark, you know, so I got to meet Eugenie Clark and Perry Gilbert and Sonny Gruber. These are all giant names in shark science that I had been reading about, you know, and some of them became friends. You know, I got to meet, and Frank Carey out of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, a pioneer in shark tracking, you know, that I got to actually be on a boat with and work with and track sharks with. You know, I love history. I love the history of shark science, and getting to meet and see that these icons in the field are people that are just great people. Not only great scientists, that to me was really important as part of my development as a scientist.
OSearch data shows 57 of 92 white sharks tagged in the western North Atlantic moved into the Gulf. This is nearly evenly split between males and females, from young of the year to adults. Overall, tagging by OSearch and the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy have given validity to reports like Ryan Warhola's.
When she showed up, Beth showed up, and pinged off Sabine Pass, I immediately screenshotted it because it was right in that general area where I saw the great white in 05. And, I said, everybody thought we were crazy back then, and then now we have proof that they're here.
As this journey comes to a close, I find myself thinking back to a conversation I had with my dad years ago, standing on a quiet Gulf Coast pier, looking out over the water, talking about sharks. I wondered if great whites had ever swum out there, just beyond the breakers. At the time, it seemed far-fetched, the stuff of old stories and curiosity. But now I know they were out there. Today, thanks to decades of enhanced conservation and a growing respect for marine ecosystems, the great white is returning. Not as a monster, but as a symbol, an amazing creature reclaiming its place in the ocean's delicate balance. And now we have a charge to keep, to protect these Gulf waters, to conserve these iconic creatures, not just for science, but for future generations who will stand on that same pier and wonder what lies beneath. Because when I look out over the Gulf now, I know the truth. The true apex predator in these waters isn't the hammerhead. It isn't even the mighty bull shark. It's Carcharodon carcharias, the great white shark, the ultimate icon of the ocean.